Millionaire husband divorced her during childbirth, but his business partner secretly became the first photograph hit her like a physical blow. Daniel, coming out of the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta, his arm around a blonde woman who definitely wasn't his wife. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, the same day he told Claire he was visiting his sick mother. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The contractions started during the board meeting, but Claire's billionaire husband was too busy destroying lives to save hers. She gripped the conference room table as another wave of pain shot through her belly. Daniel didn't even look up from his laptop. Around the mahogany table, 12 executives pretended not to notice the pregnant woman doubled over in agony. Daniel, she gasped, we need to go. Now. He held up one finger without lifting his eyes from the screen. 5 more minutes. This Atlanta deal won't close itself. 5 minutes became 20. 20 became an hour. By the time Claire's water broke across the marble floor, Daniel was already 3 phone calls deep into his next conquest. Have you ever needed someone desperately, only to realize you were completely alone? Have you ever felt invisible to the person who promised to love you forever? Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever been abandoned when you needed support the most. The ambulance ride to Charlotte Presbyterian was a nightmare of sirens and contractions. Claire called Daniel 17 times. 17 times, it went straight to voicemail. She was wheeling into emergency surgery when she finally accepted the truth. Her husband wasn't coming. The surgery lasted 3 hours. When she woke up in recovery, her body ached everywhere. The baby was healthy, thank God, but something felt wrong. The room was too quiet, too empty. That's when she saw them. Divorce papers. Sitting on a hospital tray table like a get-well card from hell. Her hands shook as she read the accusations. Adultery, fraud, abandonment of marital duties. Words that made no sense bleeding across legal letterhead, like accusations from stranger. Mrs. Richardson? She looked up to find a man standing in her doorway. Tall, dark-skinned, holding flowers that probably cost more than most people's rent. Marcus Wellington, her husband's business partner. The man who'd always made her feel nervous at corporate events. Not because he was threatening, but because he looked at her like he actually saw her. Marcus? What are you doing here? He stepped into the room, his expensive suit somehow making the sterile space feel warmer. Someone should be here. Someone who cares. The flowers were white roses. Her favorite, though she'd never told anyone that. How did you know Daniel's not coming, he said quietly, setting the bouquet on the windowsill. He's in Atlanta, closing the Henderson deal. He asked me to check on you. The lie was kind, but they both knew it was a lie. Daniel hadn't asked anyone to check on anything except his bank account. Claire's throat tightened. Did you know? About the divorce papers? Marcus moved closer to her bed, and she caught his scent, something clean and expensive that reminded her of safety. I knew Daniel was angry. I didn't know he was cruel. When he reached out to adjust her foreline, their fingers brushed. The contact sent electricity up her arm that had nothing to do with medical equipment and everything to do with the way this man had always affected her. Claire, there are things you don't know about your husband. Things about the business. About Atlanta. About why he married you. What do you mean? Marcus glanced toward the door, then back to her. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Daniel's been moving money. Lots of money. Through accounts that don't exist and contracts that were never meant to be legal. He's in deep with some dangerous people. She stared at him, trying to process words that sounded like they belonged in a movie, not her life. You're saying my husband is a criminal? I'm saying your husband is desperate, and desperate men do terrible things to the people they're supposed to protect. Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers through her exhausted body. Daniel doesn't know what I know about the Atlanta contracts. And Claire, what I know could destroy him completely. While her husband signed papers to erase their marriage, his business partner signed something far more dangerous, a promise to protect her. Marcus pulled a chair next to Claire's hospital bed and opened a manila folder that looked like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Before I show you this, I need you to understand something. Daniel didn't abandon you today because he's busy. He abandoned you because he's scared. Claire shifted against her pillows, wincing as her surgical incisions pulled tight. Scared of what? Of you finding out who he really is. The first photograph hit her like a physical blow. Daniel, coming out of the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta, his arm around a blonde woman who definitely wasn't his wife. The timestamp showed last Tuesday, the same day he told Claire he was visiting his sick mother. His secretary, Marcus, said simply, "Jessica Hartwell. They've been together for 8 months. Have you ever seen proof that your whole life was a lie? Have you ever had your reality shattered by a single photograph? Tell me in the comments how you handled discovering someone's betrayal." But the affair wasn't the worst part. The worst part came with the financial documents Marcus spread across her hospital blanket like evidence at a crime scene. "Wellington Richardson Holdings," he said, pointing to account numbers that made her head spin. "That's our company. But these accounts? These withdrawals? I never authorized any of this. $2 million. Gone. Transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands just last week. He's been stealing from the business? He's been stealing from everyone. Clients, partners, investors. But Claire, the biggest theft was from you." Marcus handed her another set of papers. Her father's trust fund. The one that was supposed to be worth $3 million. The one Daniel had convinced her to let him manage after they got married. Empty. Completely empty. "He took everything," she whispered. "Not everything." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "Your mother's medical bills. The cancer treatments she needs. I'm covering them." Claire's head snapped up. "I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do it." He wrote out a check and placed it on her nightstand. No strings attached. No payback required. This is what decent people do for each other. The amount on the check made her dizzy. More money than she'd ever seen in one place. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the Charlotte skyline. "Because 3 years ago, at that charity gala in Atlanta, you spent your entire evening talking to the janitor's daughter about college applications. You missed the whole dinner, the speeches, the networking. You sat on the floor in your $5,000 dress, helping a 17-year-old fill out financial aid forms." She remembered that night. Sarah Martinez, bright kid whose father cleaned the hotel where the gala was held. "Daniel was furious with me for missing the presentations. I watched you," Marcus said, turning back to face her. "I watched you choose kindness over networking. Choose real over fake. And I knew then that Daniel didn't deserve you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meanings neither of them was ready to address. Marcus moved closer to her bed, close enough that she could see golden flecks in his dark eyes. "There's something else, Claire. Something about the baby." Her blood went cold. "What about my baby?" "The DNA test," Daniel ordered. "The one from the fertility clinic." Marcus pulled out one final document. "The baby isn't his." The room started spinning. "That's impossible. We did IVF. They used his. They used mine." The words hit her like a physical blow. Marcus continued, his voice gentle but steady. "There was a mix-up at the clinic. They used my sample instead of Daniel's. But Claire, there's something else you need to know about whose child you're really carrying." She thought the worst betrayal was her husband's abandonment, until she learned whose DNA her child actually carried. Claire stared at the DNA results until the letters blurred together. Her hands shook as she read the percentages, the genetic markers, the undeniable proof that the child sleeping in the hospital nursery wasn't her husband's. "How long have you known?" she whispered. Marcus sat back down, running his hands through his hair. "I got the call from the fertility clinic yesterday morning. They were doing an audit after some irregularities in their system. They found a mix-up and called both Daniel and me." "Is that why he left those divorce papers?" "Because the baby isn't his." "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "Daniel left those papers because he's a coward who can't face the consequences of his own actions. The baby not being his just gave him an excuse." Claire closed her eyes, trying to process everything. 2 days ago, she was a happily married pregnant woman. Now she was divorced, broke, and carrying another man's child. But Marcus wasn't done dropping bombs. "Claire, there's something else. Something about us." About that night in Atlanta 3 years ago. Her eyes snapped open. "What about it? You don't remember, do you? After the gala, after you helped Sarah with her applications." The memories came back in fragments. The hotel bar. Too many drinks after Daniel's public humiliation about her missing the speeches. Marcus finding her alone, upset, vulnerable. Have you ever had a night you try to forget, only to discover it changed everything? Have you ever wondered if one moment of weakness could alter your entire future? Drop your thoughts in the comments about choices that haunt us. "We talked," she said slowly. "You drove me home because Daniel left with his business associates. We did more than talk." The memory hit her like cold water. The elevator to her apartment. Marcus's gentle hands helping her with her keys. The way he'd looked at her when she'd started crying about feeling invisible in her own marriage. The kiss that had lasted longer than it should have. The way he'd pulled back and apologized immediately. The promise they'd both made to never speak of it again. "That was 3 years ago," she said. "This baby is 6 months old from conception. The fertility clinic keeps samples frozen for years. They mixed up dates along with everything else." Marcus pulled out another document. "My sample from 3 years ago. Used 6 months ago for your IVF procedure." Claire's world tilted completely off its axis. The child she'd carried, delivered, and loved wasn't her husband's. It was the result of a single, regrettable moment with a man she'd tried to forget. "This is insane," she breathed. "It gets worse." Marcus moved to her bedside, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Daniel knows. He's known since yesterday. And he's not planning to just divorce you and walk away." "What do you mean?" "He's planning to claim the baby isn't yours either. He's going to court claiming you had an affair, that you deliberately got pregnant with my child, and that you're an unfit mother who should lose custody." The words hit her like physical blows. "He can't do that. The baby is mine. I carried him. I gave birth to him. With enough money and the right lawyers, Daniel can do whatever he wants. Unless..." "Unless what?" Marcus reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm, callousing from weekend work he did with his hands despite his wealth. "Unless you let me fight for you. For both of you." The electricity that shot up her arm from his touch was the same thing she'd felt 3 years ago. The same thing that had gotten them into this mess. "You planned this," Claire whispered, her hand on Marcus's chest feeling his heartbeat race. "You wanted me to have your child." His answer made her knees weak. "No, Claire. I wanted you." Moving into her husband's business partner's penthouse was supposed to be temporary. Until the night she realized some lines, once crossed, change everything forever. 3 days later, Claire stood in the marble foyer of Marcus's downtown Charlotte penthouse, holding her baby and a single suitcase containing everything she owned. Daniel's lawyers had frozen her credit cards, locked her out of their house, and somehow convinced a judge to freeze her bank accounts pending the divorce proceedings. "This is temporary," she told Marcus as he showed her to the guest bedroom. "Just until I figure things out." The room was bigger than her first apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the bed looked like something from a luxury hotel. But what caught her attention was the crib in the corner, already set up with blankets and toys. "You were expecting us," she said. Marcus stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "I was hoping you'd be smart enough to accept help when you needed it. Have you ever been forced to depend on someone you barely trusted? Have you ever had to choose between pride and survival? Tell me in the comments about times you had to swallow your independence." Living with Marcus was nothing like she'd expected. He left for work before she woke up and came home after she'd gone to bed. He stocked the kitchen with everything she and the baby needed, paid for a nanny during the day so she could rest, and never once made her feel like a charity case. But the tension was always there, in the way he looked at her during the few moments they crossed paths, in the electricity that sparked every time they accidentally touched, in the knowledge that the child she held was as much his as it was hers. The breaking point came on a Thursday night when Charlotte was hit by the worst thunderstorm in years. Claire had been pacing the living room, trying to calm the baby, when Marcus came home soaked from the rain. Power's out in half the city, he said, shaking water from his hair. Good thing this building has generators. Lightning crashed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and thunder followed immediately after. The baby started crying harder. He hates storms, Claire said, bouncing him gently. Nothing I do helps. Marcus moved closer, still in his wet shirt and tie. May I? She handed over the baby, and Marcus cradled him with surprising expertise. Within minutes, the crying stopped. How did you? I have 3 nephews, he said softly, looking down at the child. They all hated thunderstorms too. Rain lashed the windows as Claire watched Marcus with their son, because that's what he was, biologically speaking. Their son. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in months. This is crazy, she breathed against his lips, but her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. Crazy might be the first honest thing we've felt, he murmured, backing her against the window as lightning illuminated their reflection. His mouth was on hers before either of them could think about consequences. The kiss was desperate, hungry, full of 3 years of suppressed attraction and the electric tension of living together while pretending they didn't want each other. His hands tangled in her hair as she pulled him closer. The storm outside, nothing compared to the one building between them. She could taste rain on his lips, feel the warmth of his skin through his wet shirt. Claire, he whispered against her mouth, if we do this, there's no going back. Maybe I don't want to go back, she replied, surprising herself with the boldness in her voice. But before either of them could cross that final line, Marcus's phone rang. The sound cut through the moment like a knife. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring, his voice ice cold. What do you want, Daniel? Daniel's voice was loud enough for Claire to hear. I know she's there, Marcus. And I know about the baby. If you think you can steal my wife and my heir, you're about to learn how wrong you are. Business meetings became war zones where every handshake was a weapon and every contract was written in betrayal. The next morning, Marcus's office felt like a command center preparing for war. Legal documents covered every surface. 3 different lawyers sat around the conference table, and Claire found herself at the center of a battle she never wanted to fight. Daniel's filed for emergency custody, attorney Sarachan announced, sliding papers across the mahogany table. He's claiming you're mentally unstable and living in an inappropriate situation with his business partner. Claire's hands tightened around her coffee cup. The baby isn't even his. Legally, it doesn't matter. He's the husband on record when the child was born. He has rights. Marcus leaned forward from his position behind Claire's chair. What rights does the biological father have? If paternity is established and you're willing to fight for custody, quite a few. But Daniel's lawyers are smart. They're painting this as an affair that Claire planned to defraud her husband. Have you ever been painted as the villain in your own story? Have you ever watched someone twist the truth to make you look guilty of crimes you never committed? Share in the comments how you fought back against lies. The meeting was interrupted by Marcus's assistant rushing in with her tablet. Sir, you need to see the news. The local Charlotte Business Channel was running a story about the Richardson-Wellington partnership dissolution. But the real gut punch was the interview with Daniel himself, standing outside the courthouse in his best suit, playing the wounded husband perfectly. I trusted Marcus Wellington like a brother, Daniel said to the cameras. I brought him into my business, into my family. To discover that he seduced my wife while she was vulnerable during fertility treatments is a betrayal I never saw coming. Claire watched her husband lie with the skill of a politician. He's making it sound like you planned this whole thing. He's smarter than I gave him credit for, Marcus said grimly. He's controlling the narrative. But Marcus had cards to play too. Within an hour, his own press conference was scheduled. Claire watched from the office as he stood in front of the Wellington Industries building, calm and controlled while reporters shouted questions. Mr. Richardson has been stealing from joint accounts for months, Marcus announced. We have documentation of $2 million in unauthorized transfers, falsified contracts, and offshore accounts that violate federal banking laws. The reporters exploded with follow-up questions, but Marcus held up his hand. More importantly, Mr. Richardson has been systematically draining his wife's personal trust fund. Money left to her by her deceased father to fund his gambling debts and extramarital relationships. Claire's breath caught. She hadn't known about gambling debts. The child in question is biologically mine due to a fertility clinic error that occurred without anyone's knowledge. Mrs. Richardson only discovered this yesterday, at the same time I did. Any claims that this was planned or coordinated are simply false. But the real bombshell came next. I'm also announcing today that Wellington Industries is formally withdrawing from all joint ventures with Richardson Holdings. We have evidence of fraudulent contracts tied to Atlanta-based money laundering operations that we cannot and will not continue to support. Claire stood up, so fast her chair rolled backward. Money laundering? You didn't tell me about money laundering. Marcus's expression was grim, because I hoped I was wrong. But after digging deeper into the Atlanta contracts, it's worse than I thought. He pulled out a file she hadn't seen before. Your husband isn't just a cheater and a thief, Claire. He's connected to people who make corporate fraud look like shoplifting. Before she could respond, the fire alarm started blaring throughout the building. But this wasn't a drill. Through the windows, she could see smoke pouring from the parking garage below. Marcus grabbed her hand. Daniel's not just trying to ruin us financially. He's trying to eliminate the evidence, and us with it. The warehouse fire was supposed to destroy the evidence of Daniel's crimes. Instead, it forged the bond that would burn down his entire empire. The emergency stairwell filled with smoke as Marcus pulled Claire toward the exit. 20 floors down, her legs shaking from adrenaline and fear. Behind them, the sound of windows exploding sent glass raining onto the Charlotte streets below. The parking garage, Marcus shouted over the chaos. Someone set charges in the document storage area. They burst through the lobby doors into a wall of sirens and flashing lights. Fire trucks, police cars, ambulances. The entire block looked like a disaster movie. Mr. Wellington. A detective approached them as paramedics checked Claire for smoke inhalation. We need to talk. Detective Rodriguez had the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. This wasn't an accident. We found accelerant residue and timer devices. Someone wanted this building to burn, and they wanted to make sure certain files went with it. Have you ever realized someone was trying to kill you? Have you ever felt the moment when you understand your life is in real danger? Tell me in the comments about times you faced genuine fear. The safe house was a cabin 2 hours outside Charlotte, hidden in the Blue Ridge Mountains where cell service was spotty and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. FBI agent Lisa Park had insisted they disappear while the investigation continued. Daniel's connected to more than just money laundering. Agent Park explained as she showed them the security features. We've been tracking a network of Atlanta businessmen involved in everything from drug money to human trafficking. Your husband was their accountant. Claire sank onto the couch, exhaustion hitting her like a physical weight. I lived with him for 3 years. How'd I not know? Because he was good at hiding it, Marcus said, sitting beside her. And because you trusted him. The cabin felt like stepping into another world. Rough wooden walls, a stone fireplace, furniture that looked handmade rather than purchased. No marble counters or floor-to-ceiling windows. Just simple, honest comfort. That night, after the baby was asleep and Agent Park had returned to Charlotte, Claire found herself alone with Marcus for the first time since everything started. I can't do this, she said, staring into the fire. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding. This isn't the life I want for my son. Marcus moved from his chair to sit beside her on the thick rug in front of the fireplace. What do you want, Claire? Really want, not what you think you should want. The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked her that? I want to feel safe, she said quietly. I want my son to grow up knowing his father. I want to stop being afraid every time the phone rings. What else? She looked at him, firelight dancing across his face, making his eyes look almost golden. I want to stop pretending I don't feel something for you. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. I need to feel alive, she whispered, her fingers tracing the scar on his shoulder from the warehouse escape. Then let me show you, he replied, lifting her onto the thick rug before the fire. each touch a promise of protection and desire. His hands were gentle as he undressed her, reverent in a way that made her feel precious rather than just wanted. When he kissed her neck, she arched against him, months of fear and tension melting away in the warmth of his touch. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her skin. "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied, pulling him down to her. Their lovemaking was slow and deliberate, firelight painting their bodies in gold and shadow. Every kiss felt like a question, every touch an answer. When she called out his name, it echoed off the cabin walls like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the rug, his arm around her as she traced patterns on his chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we fight back," he said, pressing his lips to her hair. "Together." But their mountain peace shattered at dawn when Agent Park's call came through. "We have Daniel in custody, but Claire, you need to know, he's not working alone. There's someone else, someone close to you both." The person she trusted with her deepest secrets had been feeding information to her husband all along. And the betrayal cut deeper than divorce papers ever could. Agent Park's voice crackled through the satellite phone like bad news wrapped in static. "We arrested Daniel at the Atlanta airport, trying to board a plane to the Cayman Islands. But during questioning, he gave up his source. Claire, it's your best friend." The world stopped moving. "That's impossible. Rachel would never." "Rachel Chun has been receiving payments from your husband for 8 months. Phone records show she's been reporting your location, your conversations, even your therapy sessions after the miscarriage last year." Claire's hands started shaking. Rachel had been her maid of honor, her confidant through the fertility struggles, the person she called crying after every failed pregnancy test. Marcus took the phone. "What kind of payments?" $50,000. Deposited monthly into an account she opened specifically for this arrangement. The betrayal hit deeper than Daniel's affair, deeper than the financial theft. Rachel had held her while she cried about feeling invisible in her marriage. Rachel had encouraged her to try couple therapy. Rachel had been the one person Claire thought she could trust completely. "There's more," Agent Park continued. "Your husband's been planning this divorce for over a year. The fertility clinic mix-up wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated. Daniel paid someone to switch the samples. Have you ever discovered that your closest friend was your worst enemy? Have you ever learned that the person you trusted most was betraying you for money?" Share in the comments about betrayals that changed your life forever. The confrontation happened at Claire's mother's house in Raleigh, where Rachel was visiting like she had every week for the past 6 months. Claire walked into her childhood bedroom to find her best friend sitting on the pink comforter, holding the stuffed elephant they'd won at the state fair in high school. "I know," Claire said simply. Rachel didn't even try to deny it. "How long have you known?" "Since this morning. What I don't understand is why." Rachel set down the elephant and looked at her hands. "Do you know what it's like to watch your best friend marry a millionaire while you're working 3 jobs to pay off student loans? Do you know what it's like to smile and pretend to be happy when someone gets everything you've ever wanted handed to them? So you destroyed my life for money? I destroyed your fake life to show you the truth." Rachel's voice turned bitter. "Daniel never loved you, Claire. He married you because you were pretty and poor and grateful. He needed a wife who wouldn't ask questions about his business." The word stung because part of them felt true. "And what about Marcus? Was sleeping with him part of the plan too?" Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus wasn't part of Daniel's plan. That was your own stupid choice. But it made everything easier." Claire sat on the bed across from the woman who had been her sister in everything but blood. "The miscarriage. When I called you crying, when you held me while I fell apart. Were you reporting that too?" Daniel needed to know you were emotionally unstable. He needed documentation for the custody case. The cruelty of it took Claire's breath away. Her most vulnerable moments turned into weapons against her. But the real shock came when Rachel pulled out her phone and showed Claire a text message. "He's been recording our conversations too. Everything you've told me about Marcus, about your feelings, about your plans, Daniel has it all." Claire stared at the recording app on Rachel's phone, realizing that every secret, every fear, every moment of weakness had been captured and delivered to her enemy. The recording device fell from Rachel's phone during their confrontation, and Claire realized with crystal clarity, "You've been recording everything. Our friendship, my pain, my recovery. You've been documenting my life to help him destroy it." 3 men, 1 baby, and a truth so twisted it would rewrite the definition of betrayal in the Charlotte elite circles forever. The genetic counselor's office in downtown Charlotte felt like a courtroom where Claire was both plaintiff and defendant. Dr. Sarah Kim spread the DNA results across her desk like evidence in a murder trial. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Dr. Kim said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this." 3 DNA tests, 3 different results, 3 different men claiming paternity of 1 innocent baby. The first test, ordered by your husband, shows Daniel Richardson as the father. The second test, ordered by Mr. Wellington, shows him as the father. But this third test, ordered by the FBI, shows neither man has any biological connection to your child. Claire's world tilted off its axis. "That's impossible. One of them has to be the father." Dr. Kim pulled out a 4th document. According to this final analysis, the biological father is someone named James Richardson, Daniel's brother. The name hit Claire like a physical blow. James Richardson, the quiet brother who worked in Daniel's shadow. The one who'd always made her uncomfortable at family gatherings with his lingering looks and inappropriate comments. "I've never been intimate with James," Claire said firmly. "The conception would have occurred approximately 9 months ago. Do you remember any medical procedures, any situation where you might have been unconscious or impaired?" The memory came back in horrible, crystal-clear pieces. The charity gala in Atlanta. The one where she'd met Marcus in the hotel bar. The drinks that had hit her harder than they should have. The way James had appeared, offering to help her to her room when Marcus left to take a business call. Have you ever realized that what you thought was kindness was actually assault? Have you ever discovered that your memory of a night was deliberately stolen from you? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had your reality rewritten by someone else's crimes. The hotel security footage was 9 months old, but technology had ways of recovering what people wanted to stay buried. Agent Park played the recording on her laptop while Claire, Marcus, and Dr. Kim watched in horror. There it was. James Richardson helping an obviously drugged Claire Richardson into the elevator. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. The next footage from the hallway camera showed James leaving her hotel room at 2:23 a.m. Claire had no memory of those 3 hours. "He drugged me," she whispered. "Rohypnol," Agent Park confirmed. "We found traces in your hair sample from that time period." The fertility clinic procedures happened 2 weeks later, but James had already accomplished what he wanted. Marcus stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He planned this. The whole thing. Daniel, the divorce, the custody battle. It was all James. Daniel was just the front man. Agent Park agreed. James has been running the money laundering operation for years. He needed a baby to carry on the family name and inherit the business legitimately. When Daniel's marriage to Claire gave him access, he saw his opportunity. The final piece of the puzzle was the most disturbing. James hadn't just assaulted Claire. He manipulated the fertility clinic to ensure the baby would be his. The clinic director had been paid $200,000 to falsify records and ensure James's genetic material was used instead of Daniel's. "Every single person in my life was part of this conspiracy," Claire said numbly. "Not every person," Marcus said, taking her hand. "I wasn't part of this, Claire. What I feel for you, what we built together, that was real." But before she could respond, Dr. Kim's office door burst open. James Richardson stood in the doorway with a gun, his smile cold and familiar. "Hello, Claire. I think it's time we talked about that night in Atlanta and what you don't remember." The charity gala where she met her husband was also where his brother destroyed her life, and she was about to remember every horrifying detail. James Richardson looked nothing like the mild-mannered accountant who'd sat quietly at family dinners for 3 years. The man holding a gun in Dr. Kim's office was someone else entirely, cold, calculating, and completely in control. "Everyone stay calm," he said, locking the door behind him. "Claire and I just need to clear up some confusion about that night in Atlanta." Agent Park slowly reached for a weapon, but James shook his head. I wouldn't. I have nothing left to lose now, thanks to my dear sister-in-law's investigation. Claire's mind raced through fragments of that night. The hotel bar. Too many drinks. Marcus leaving to take a phone call. James appearing like a knight in shining armor, offering to help her to her room. You remember some of it, don't you? James asked, settling into Dr. Kim's chair like he owned the place. The way I helped you with your key card? The way I made sure you got safely inside? You drugged me. I helped you relax. His voice was conversational, like they were discussing the weather. You were so tense about Daniel's business problems, so worried about the fertility treatments not working. I provided a solution to both issues. The memories came flooding back in horrible waves. Waking up in her hotel room, feeling wrong, violated, empty. The shower that didn't wash away the feeling of invisible hands. The shame she'd carried for months without understanding why. Have you ever had someone steal your memory along with your body? Have you ever discovered that your entire life was built on a crime you couldn't remember? Share in the comments about reclaiming power from people who tried to erase you. The baby was always supposed to be mine, James continued. Daniel was just the cover story. When the fertility clinic called about the mix-up, I knew my plan had worked perfectly. Marcus stepped forward. You manipulated everyone. Your own brother, the clinic staff, Claire's best friend. I created opportunities, James corrected. Daniel needed money for his gambling debts. Rachel needed money for her student loans. The clinic director needed money for his daughter's medical treatments. Everyone got what they needed. Except Claire, Agent Park said quietly. James looked at Claire with something that might have been affection if it wasn't so twisted. Claire got the most important thing of all. She got to carry my child. She got to be part of the Richardson legacy. The recording device Claire had noticed earlier was still running on Dr. Kim's desk. Every word of James's confession was being captured. Why? Claire asked. Why me? Why not find someone who actually wanted to be with you? Because you were perfect, James said simply. Beautiful, intelligent, from a good family, but not wealthy enough to ask questions. And most importantly, you belonged to Daniel. Taking you away from him was just a bonus. The confession continued for another 20 minutes. James detailed how he'd planned everything, from the drugging to the fertility clinic manipulation to the divorce papers. He'd orchestrated Claire's entire nightmare. But the real shock came when he pulled out his phone and played a recording. Daniel's voice filled the room. Just get rid of her, James. The baby's what matters now. Claire's serve her purpose. My dear brother, James said with a smile. Always thinking too small. Why get rid of Claire when we can use her as leverage? Before anyone could react, James stood up and moved toward Claire. You see, sweetheart, this isn't over. It's just beginning. The recording device fell from James's pocket during their confrontation, and Claire realized with crystal clarity, you've been recording everything. The assault, the conversations, everything. You planned to blackmail me all along. The woman they thought they had destroyed was about to become the architect of their downfall, and she was going to enjoy every moment of their ruin. Agent Park's gun was trained on James Richardson, but Claire was the one who took control of the room. You made one mistake, she said, standing up despite the weapon pointed in her direction. You underestimated me. James laughed. What could you possibly do? You're just a victim, Claire. You always have been. I'm a survivor who's tired of being afraid. Claire reached in her purse and pulled out her own recording device. The one she'd been carrying for weeks, ever since Marcus had taught her to document everything for the legal case. Every word you just said is being broadcast live to the FBI field office, she announced, including your confession to assault, conspiracy, fraud, and kidnapping. James's confident expression cracked. You're bluffing. Am I? Claire held up her phone. Agent Park, tell him what you're hearing in your earpiece. Agent Park smiled. James Richardson, you are under arrest for sexual assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and about 15 other felonies. You have the right to remain silent. The takedown was swift and professional. Within minutes, James was in handcuffs and the office was swarming with FBI agents who'd been positioned outside the building. But the real victory came later, in the courthouse steps where Claire faced the media for the first time since the story broke. For months, I've been painted as an adulteress, a gold digger, a woman who destroyed her own marriage for money, she said into the microphones. Today, the truth comes out. I was the victim of a coordinated assault that included drugging, rape, fraud, and conspiracy. The questions came fast and loud, but Claire answered each one with calm precision. Yes, she was seeking full custody of her son. Yes, she was pressing charges against everyone involved. And yes, she was starting a foundation to help other women who'd been victims of similar crimes. What does real justice look like to you? When you finally get your power back, how do you use it? Drop your thoughts on turning pain into purpose in the comments below. Marcus stood beside her throughout the press conference, not as her savior, but as her partner. When reporters asked about their relationship, Claire was clear. Marcus Wellington saved my life, but more importantly, he saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. We're building a future based on truth, not lies. The legal consequences came quickly. Daniel Richardson was sentenced to 8 years for fraud and conspiracy. James Richardson got 25 years for assault and extortion. Rachel Chun received probation and community service after testifying against both brothers. But the sweetest victory came when Marcus's business lawyers presented Claire with documents that changed everything. Your father's trust fund, Marcus explained as they sat in his office, their office now, reviewing the papers. James had been stealing from it for years, but we've recovered everything. With interest, you're looking at about $12 million. Claire stared at the numbers. My father left me $12 million? Your father was smarter than anyone knew. He protected your inheritance in ways that took years to uncover. The money meant security. It meant never having to depend on anyone again. But more than that, it meant the power to create change. I want to start with a women's shelter, Claire said. Something for survivors of assault and domestic violence. Somewhere they can rebuild their lives with dignity. Marcus smiled. I know just the place. There's a building in downtown Charlotte that's been empty for years. Perfect for renovation. As they celebrated their legal victory, Marcus pulled out a small velvet box. Claire, I have something to ask you, but first there's one more secret I need to tell you about your father. She spent her life wondering why her father abandoned her, until she discovered he didn't leave by choice, and his killer was closer than she ever imagined. The velvet box sat unopened on Marcus's desk as he pulled out a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Claire had seen enough legal documents in the past few months to last a lifetime, but something about Marcus's expression told her this was different. Your father didn't die in a car accident, Marcus said quietly. He was murdered. The words hit her like cold water. What are you talking about? My mother said. Your mother was protecting you. She was 19 years old with a baby, and she was scared. Marcus opened the folder, revealing photographs that looked like they belonged in a crime scene investigation. Your father, David Chun, was a forensic accountant. He discovered something that got him killed. Claire stared at pictures of her father she'd never seen before. Not the smiling family photos her mother had saved, but surveillance shots, police reports, and newspaper clippings that painted a very different story. He was investigating money laundering operations in Atlanta in the early 1990s. Specifically, a network of businessmen who were washing drug money through real estate developments. The name at the top of the investigation file made Claire's blood run cold. Richardson Holdings. Daniel's father killed my dad, Daniel's father, his uncle, and James. 3 generations of Richardson men have been running this operation for 30 years. Your father got too close to the truth. Have you ever discovered that your family history was completely different than what you were told? Have you ever learned that your parent died because they were trying to do the right thing? Share in the comments about family secrets that changed everything. The safe deposit box key had been hidden in her mother's jewelry box for 25 years. When they opened it at the downtown Charlotte bank, Claire found more than just her father's investigation notes. Stock certificates, property deeds, bank account numbers. Her father had been building a case against the Richardson family, but he'd also been building a fortune for his daughter. He knew they were going to kill him, Claire whispered, reading her father's handwritten letter addressed to my beautiful Claire. He liquidated everything and put it in trust accounts that would mature when I turned 30. The inheritance was staggering. $15 million in various investments, plus property in 3 states that her father had purchased as evidence but legally belonged to her. "You're not just rich, Claire," Marcus said, scanning the documents. "You own half of downtown Atlanta." But the most shocking discovery was a recording her father had made just days before his death. His voice, eerily similar to hers, filled Marcus's office through the old cassette player they'd found at an electronics store. "If you're hearing this, sweetheart, it means they got me. But it also means you're old enough to finish what I started. The Richardson family has been stealing, killing, and destroying lives for decades. You have the power to stop them." Claire's hands shook as she listened to her father's voice for the first time since childhood. "I love you, baby girl. Make them pay for every family they've destroyed, including ours." The emotional weight of hearing her dead father's voice almost broke her, but it also filled her with a purpose she'd never felt before. "We're not just fighting for us anymore," she told Marcus. "We're fighting for every person they've hurt for 30 years. Marcus reached for her hand. "What do you want to do?" "I want to destroy them completely. I want to take every dollar they've stolen, every property they've bought with blood money, and I want to give it all back to the families they've destroyed." The plan they developed over the next week was ambitious and dangerous. Using her father's evidence and her newfound wealth, Claire would buy out every Richardson property, expose every crime, and systematically dismantle the empire built on her father's grave. The will reading was interrupted by gunfire outside the law office. Through the chaos, Claire saw Daniel's brother raising a weapon. "If I can't have the fortune, no one can." Bulletproof glass couldn't stop the bullets, but it couldn't stop the woman who had already survived everything they threw at her. The law office windows exploded inward as James Richardson opened fire from the parking lot. Claire dove behind the conference table, her heart hammering against her ribs, while Marcus shielded her with his body. "He escaped federal custody this morning," Agent Parks shouted over the gunfire, speaking into her radio. "All units, we have an active shooter at the Morrison Law Building." James had nothing left to lose. His brother was in prison, his money was frozen, and his crimes were front-page news across 3 states. But a desperate man with military training and a grudge was the most dangerous kind of enemy. "Claire," James's voice echoed through the shattered windows. "You think you've won? You think destroying my family makes you some kind of hero?" More bullets shattered the remaining glass. Claire could hear sirens in the distance, but they sounded too far away. "I need to get to him," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "Absolutely not," Marcus replied, pulling her closer. "You're not going anywhere near that psychopath." But Claire had spent too many months being afraid. She'd spent too many nights hiding, running, letting other people fight her battles. This ended now. Have you ever reached a point where you refuse to be afraid anymore? Have you ever decided that standing up was worth the risk of getting hurt? Tell me in the comments about moments when you chose courage over safety. Agent Park's backup team surrounded the building, but James had positioned himself perfectly. High ground in the parking garage, multiple escape routes, and enough ammunition to hold them off for hours. "He wants me," Claire said, checking the gun Agent Park had taught her to use weeks ago. "This has always been about me." "Claire, don't even think about it," Marcus warned. But she was already moving toward the broken window. "James, let's finish this." The parking garage felt like a tomb. Concrete pillars cast long shadows, and every footstep echoed like a gunshot. Claire moved carefully, her weapon drawn, following the sound of James's voice. "You destroyed everything," he called out from somewhere in the darkness. "My business, my family, my legacy. For what? Some misguided sense of justice." "For my father," Claire replied, stepping around a pillar. "For every person you've hurt. For the life you stole from me." She found him on the 3rd level, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, his gun trained on the entrance where Marcus would appear any second. "He's coming to save you," James said with a twisted smile. "Just like he saved you from Daniel. Just like he saved you from me." But what happens when there's no one left to save you from yourself? The psychological games didn't work anymore. Claire had learned too much about herself, fought too hard for her freedom, to be manipulated by words. "I don't need saving," she said, raising her weapon. "I need justice." The standoff lasted 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. James's finger tightened on the trigger just as Marcus appeared in the stairwell behind him. Claire made a choice that would haunt and empower her for the rest of her life. She pulled the trigger first. The shot echoed through the parking garage like thunder. James Richardson fell backward, his weapon clattering across the concrete, finally silent. Marcus reached her just as her legs gave out. "It's over," he whispered, holding her as she shook. "It's finally over." But the price of freedom had been higher than either of them expected. In the ambulance, as paramedics treated Marcus for cuts from the glass and Claire for shock, the real cost became clear. The hospital waiting room became Claire's battlefield as she paced outside Marcus's surgery, her hands still shaking from firing the gun that saved both their lives. Love isn't just about standing by someone when they're strong. It's about building a new life when everything you plan gets taken away. 3 months later, Claire stood in the physical therapy center in Zurich, watching Marcus take his first steps since the surgery. The bullet fragment that had lodged near his spine during the parking garage shootout had required experimental treatment that wasn't available in the United States. "Come on," she encouraged, holding out her hands. 5 more steps. His progress was slower than either of them had hoped, but every small victory felt monumental. The man who had once commanded boardrooms from behind mahogany desks was learning to celebrate, taking 10 steps without assistance. "I used to close million-dollar deals before lunch," Marcus said, breathing heavily as he reached the parallel bars. "Now I'm celebrating walking to the water fountain." "Different kind of victory," Claire replied, kissing his forehead. "But victory all the same." The Richardson Foundation for Justice, funded entirely by Claire's inheritance and the recovered stolen money, had opened its doors in Charlotte while they were in Switzerland. The building that had once housed Daniel's fraudulent operations now provided legal aid, counseling, and financial assistance to families destroyed by white-collar crime. Have you ever had to redefine success when life changed all your plans? Have you ever found that the most important victories are the smallest ones? Share in the comments about finding new dreams when old ones get broken. Claire had thrown herself into running the foundation remotely, but the real work happened during Marcus's recovery. She learned things about herself she'd never known. Her capacity for patience, her ability to lead, her strength when someone she loved needed her to be strong. "The Atlanta properties are selling faster than we expected," she told him during one of their evening walks through the Swiss Alps. "We'll have enough money to open 3 more centers by next year." "What about the Richardson family assets?" "Completely liquidated. Every dollar they stole is going back to the families they hurt." Claire smiled, "Including a full college scholarship fund in my father's name." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "You realize what you've accomplished, don't you? You've single-handedly dismantled a criminal empire that operated for 30 years. "We accomplished it," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The admission felt natural now. 6 months ago, accepting help had felt like weakness. Now she understood that partnership meant sharing both burdens and victories. Their relationship had evolved during his recovery. The desperate passion of their early encounters had deepened into something more sustainable. They'd learned to communicate without crisis driving their conversations. They discovered they actually liked each other outside of life-threatening situations. "There's something I need to tell you," Claire said as they sat on a bench overlooking Lake Geneva. "Something I've been waiting to share until you were stronger." Marcus tensed. "Please tell me it's not more Richardson family secrets." Claire laughed, the sound echoing across the water. "It's about us, about our future." She pulled out a small white envelope and handed it to him. Inside were ultrasound pictures and a doctor's note in German. "I don't speak German," Marcus said, studying the documents. "It says we're having a baby," Claire announced, watching his face transform. "Conceived right here in Switzerland. Completely our choice this time." Marcus stared at the ultrasound images, then at Claire, then back at the pictures. A baby? We're having a baby. We're having a baby. He pulled her into his arms, careful of his still healing back, and kissed her with the kind of joy that made up for months of pain and uncertainty. "Marry me," he said against her lips, "right here in Switzerland. Today." The adoption papers were signed, the foundation launched, and Marcus was taking his first steps, but Claire's morning sickness meant their family was about to grow in ways they never expected. 18 months after she woke up to divorce papers, Claire was signing different papers, ones that would build an empire instead of destroying a marriage. The chapel in Interlaken, Switzerland was small enough to fit in Marcus's old office, but it felt bigger than any cathedral. Swiss mountains framed the windows like nature's stained glass, and the only guests were Agent Park, who'd flown in as Claire's maid of honor, and Dr. Kim, who'd become an unexpected friend through all the legal proceedings. Claire's dress was a simple white silk that accommodated her growing belly, and Marcus wore a navy suit that made his eyes look almost golden in the afternoon light. Nothing about this wedding resembled the elaborate Charlotte Society event she'd had with Daniel 3 years ago. This was better.
Do you, Claire Elizabeth Shun, take Marcus to be your husband, to build a life based on truth, partnership, and love? I do, she said, meaning it in ways she'd never meant anything before. When Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, a simple band inscribed with coordinates of their Swiss mountain where they'd first talked about the future, Claire felt something shift in her chest. Not just love, but certainty. The honeymoon lasted one night at a resort overlooking Lake Thun, where they made love with the gentle passion of people who had time to savor each other. No desperation, no crisis driving them together. Just two people choosing each other every day. "What do you think he'll be like?" Marcus asked, his hand resting on her belly where their son was growing. "Strong," Claire said immediately, "but gentle, like his father." "What if it's a girl?" Claire smiled. "Then she'll be unstoppable, like her mother." Have you ever felt like your life finally made sense? Have you ever experienced the moment when all the pain led to something beautiful? Share in the comments about new beginnings that made everything worth it. The flight back to Charlotte brought them home to a foundation that had helped over 200 families in its first year. The Richardson Foundation had become a model for victim advocacy, and Claire found herself testifying before Congress about white-collar crime reform. Mrs. Wellington, the committee chairman, addressed her during the hearing. "What would you say to other women who feel powerless against wealthy criminals?" Claire leaned into the microphone, her voice carrying across the packed hearing room. "I would say that the system is designed to make you feel small, but you're not small. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And when enough of us speak up, even the most powerful criminals can't hide anymore." The applause was thunderous, but the real victory came in the letters. Hundreds of them, from women across the country who had found the courage to fight back against their own powerful abusers. Marcus's recovery had progressed to the point where he could walk unassisted, though he still used a cane on difficult days. More importantly, he learned to accept help when he needed it and celebrate progress instead of mourning perfection. The Charlotte City Council wants to rename 5th Street, he told her over dinner at their new house, a comfortable suburban place with a yard for their growing family instead of a glass tower. They want to call it David Chun Way. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "My father would have liked that. He would have been proud of you," Marcus said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You finish what he started." The foundation's second year brought expansion to 5 cities and a partnership with the FBI to create victim advocacy programs. Claire's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and their son. They learned it was a boy, kicked constantly, as if he was already eager to join their fight for justice. As Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, Claire smiled through happy tears. "Yes, but first, there's something you should know about the Foundation's first major donation, and who it's really from." The woman who once had nothing left to lose had become the woman who had everything to give, and her greatest gift was showing others their own strength. The nursery in their Charlotte home overlooked the city skyline where it all began, but instead of glass towers representing power, Claire saw possibilities. Each building could house a foundation office. Each neighborhood could benefit from the programs they were developing. Each family could find the help they needed to fight back against the powerful people who tried to destroy them. "He's going to be a fighter," Marcus said, his hand on Claire's 8-month belly as the baby kicked against her ribs. "Just like his mother." Claire rocked in the chair her mother had bought, the same one where her grandmother had rocked her father before he became the man who would expose corruption and die for justice. The circle was completing itself in ways she was only beginning to understand. "The donation," she said, returning to the conversation they'd started at their wedding. "The $10 million that launched the foundation. It didn't come from my inheritance." Marcus looked confused. Where did it come from? Claire pulled out a letter she'd been saving for this moment. From every woman whose life Daniel and James Richardson destroyed over the past 30 years. They found each other through victim support groups, and they pooled their settlements, their savings, their insurance payouts. They wanted to make sure no other woman would go through what they went through. The letter was signed by 47 women, wives who had been cheated, business partners who had been defrauded, young women who had been assaulted. They had turned their pain into power and their isolation into community. "They asked me to be their voice," Claire continued. "Not because I was the perfect victim, but because I was the one who survived publicly. Because I fought back in a way that gave them permission to fight back too." Have you ever realized that your worst experience became someone else's hope? Have you ever discovered that your survival story gave other people permission to survive too? Tell me in the comments about turning your testimony into someone else's freedom. The Richardson Foundation's 3rd anniversary celebration filled the Charlotte Convention Center with survivors, supporters, and success stories. Claire stood at the podium, 7 months pregnant with their daughter. The ultrasound had revealed a surprise and looked out at faces that represented every kind of courage. 3 years ago, I woke up in a hospital room to divorce papers and accusations that tried to make me ashamed of my own survival, she began. Today, I stand before you as proof that shame doesn't belong to the survivors. It belongs to the perpetrators. The applause was deafening, but Claire held up her hand. She wasn't finished. "We've helped over 3,000 families recover stolen money, escape dangerous situations, and find justice in courts that used to ignore their voices. But the most important thing we've done is prove that when survivors support each other, we become unstoppable." Marcus watched from the side of the stage, holding their son, 2-year-old David, named for Claire's father, while she delivered the speech that would be quoted in law schools and victim advocacy training for years to come. "The people who try to destroy us count on our silence, our shame, our isolation. They count on us believing we deserved what happened to us. But we know better now. We know that survival is not a solo sport. We know that justice is not a luxury for the wealthy. And we know that when enough of us speak up, the whole system has to listen." After the celebration, as they tucked David into his bed and prepared for their daughter's arrival, Claire reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "We made it," she whispered against Marcus's lips as they swayed to music only they could hear. "No," he replied, his hands cradling her face and their growing child. "We made something better. We made a love worth fighting for." So what would you do if your worst betrayal led to your greatest triumph? Would you use your pain to help others? Comment below with what part of Claire's journey inspired you most. If this story of survival, love, and justice moved you, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about women who refused to stay down when life knocked them out. Tell me in the comments which moment made you want to cheer for Claire. Remember, every ending is just a new beginning waiting to unfold.